Every administration has different policies that affect immigrant children. And so the way that I like to categorize these policies is restrictive policies and inclusive policies, or exclusive policies and inclusive policies. So exclusive policies might include things such as closing the border, which we saw during the previous administration. They began a policy called the Migrant Protection Protocol, which forced people to wait in Mexico for their asylum claims to be heard. And during the Migrant Protection Protocol, you had people waiting for months to years in encampments across the border that were often unsafe, both in terms of their physical safety, such as not having appropriate shelter, access to food, access to water, risk for physical and sexual violence, as well as really not having an opportunity to necessarily know exactly how you would find the resources you need to be able to have your case successfully heard. The second policy, which was Title 42, is a public health measure that people utilize to keep safety under public health emergencies. And during COVID, that policy was utilized to close the border. Unfortunately, there was no evidence at that time that people who were immigrants were any more likely to bring in COVID than any other person, but that policy was used anyway as a way to exclude people. And the challenge with that is that they didn't have due process, which means that under the Migrant Protection Protocol, they were given a court date. Under Title 42, they weren't. So both of those policies were considered exclusive policies, which really placed people at risk for not being able to seek their legal right to humanitarian protection under international law. So those policies have now been lifted, and I do wonder if there's an administration change, if those policies or policies like those to, quote, close the border will be reinstated, which would be very troubling from a humanitarian and a human rights perspective, as well as a child's rights perspective, because they would be inconsistent with international human rights protections. Other policies that you might see shift, so for instance, President Biden just a couple weeks ago made it possible for people with DACA or deferred action for childhood arrivals to be able to buy health insurance through the exchange. And I don't know that that would be continued, which would then exclude that population once again from having health coverage. Another example may be temporary protected status, which has been expanded under the current administration, but may then be restricted again under a subsequent administration. So I think it's really important for those of us caring for children and families to be aware of how the current administration impacts policies and procedures that relate to the health of people that we're taking care of.